that is more complicated than that first answer would be to do with speech acts, to do with declaration, which again takes us back to Rancière. Only the human can say, I am subhuman. And this, which is, so only the human can, as it were, resign from the status of the human. Which, one thing that shows you is that you can't do it. You can't do it. However much you do it, you're still failing. So, but that's a very, very good example. It's a fictional example, interestingly, but which is a good example, because the question would be, what we'd have to assess would be whether a level of self-imposed destitution were reached at which that declarative capacity were completely negated. And the answer that you would get from Anselm and Lévy would be that you never reach that point precisely. That is precisely the always receding point, that the horizon constantly recedes, that you never get to a point at which that declarative capacity is eliminated, because the declaration is no longer coming from the consciousness of a subject. The declaration is coming from an existential condition. I don't know, that's a very, very good question. Thank you, that'll have to do for now, but I'm not going to just be able to stop thinking about that. Thank you.
I'm glad that came first, actually, because there was something you said there about sort of not being able to rid oneself of one's sort of humanity. And the question I had sort of relates to, or I really wanted you to say a little bit more about the name of the human and the retention of the name of the human. Because, I mean, it seems to be one of the very sort of magnificent achievements of your book is that it kind of plots a trajectory across 20th century French thought. That it's a very interesting trajectory, and it connects a whole series of figures. Some of them might be more aligned with anti-humanism, virulent anti-humanism, others very heterodox form of humanism. Surprisingly, they all retain the name of the human, sometimes very surprisingly, and within a certain kind of logic that you sort of piece together. And so the question is why do you think they, and why should we, retain the name of the human? Is it an internal limit of thought that we just can't get rid of, and that's structural? And it goes back to the question of the animal. We have the discussion about the human and the animal in this context. Do we need to retain this name? Do we have to? Is there some broader category? Because obviously animals are finite. They're in the same way that we are, or perhaps not in the same way. So why retain? Why do we retain the name of the human?
Yeah. Thank you. There is part of me that thinks, fine, you know, let's not use it. Let's use something else. And indeed, that, you know, we can have more than one term. Yes, that it might be useful and interesting to retain and work on this term of the human, whilst also abandoning it elsewhere. You know, because as you say, it has its history, and we have inherited it, and we can do certain things with it. I think, but that doesn't mean that it has to be. I'm not in the business of, as it were, insisting on it as the be-all and end-all as a term. It's much more actually that, for now, as a term, it will do some work for us. That's what interests me in it. Now, the question of the work that it can do, though, gets us closer to the what might be the interest of retaining an interest in it, and why some of these folk who do maintain it, often extremely surprisingly, as you say, why they keep it. I think the answer to that is, and one reason why I wanted to, with dreadful judgment, really. I mean, this was not necessarily the best decision. But one reason why I decided I wanted to look at it is actually because it makes things really quite awkward. And it makes them awkward in any number of ways, one of which we've already seen in terms of the question of the animal. And what that flags up is that in general, the way that persisting with this name of the human for now makes things awkward is that it persists with the problem of value. You can have all manner of productive and important, very important and progressive discussions about, say, animality and the relation between our species and other species by dropping the name of the human, or certainly by refusing to privilege the name of the human. But my reservation about some of those discussions is that they proceed too smoothly and too easily, precisely because they get us beyond questions of who is the agent in these kind of processes, and by what kind of processes, by what kind of actions, or in what kind of situations, by virtue of what kind of undertakings, is that kind of agency assured and laid claim to, and so on. And as soon as you retain the name of the human in relation to that, then you have to worry about all of that. And it seems to me that we still have to worry about all of that. And we can short-circuit it all and get to languages which are faster and more excited about some of these problems. But that has always seemed to me that too many of those languages do operate as a kind of short circuit of this problem of value and how value is to be, and value and authority and therefore agency are to be defined and established in relation to the kinds of ethical and political debates that we still have to confront. So my reason for retaining it, and I think this would also be why. This is, so that would, come on this again, sorry. But that's one, in generalised terms, that would be the interest of the logic that Derrida calls paléonie, is the retaining of these old names. Because the idea that you could just close the door on all of those and go off and do something groovier is far too easy. And so, that would be why, what then Derrida says to Nancy. So Nancy it's Nancy who does this preeminently, as Derrida says. He drags around all of these old names that the rest of us were too worn out to still work on. And the reason for doing that is precisely that there are problems that these names force us to wrestle with, and that therefore what that won't allow us to do is to just bracket those problems off and pretend that we can enjoy a livelier world in which that's all been forgotten. I'm a bit rambling here, sorry.
No, thank you.
Anyone who's not asked a question?
I'm not sure exactly what my question is, but I've been reading about Levy, but I haven't actually read it myself, and that he said something like all the true witnesses died. And I was wondering, would this kind of enter into this sacrificial logic that you talked about, where a kind of reversal of, suffering is hierarchized, except he's doing it the other way around, so that instead of nothing being too low, that the death is kind of the highest. And again, this is where my question is not really a question, but in terms of speech acts and say people who have gone beyond a barrier of finitude, can their kind of silence and exclusion be recognised?
Thank you. No, that's a fantastically good question, Maria. And it's one thing that Ian mentioned, this question of not being able to rid ourselves of our humanity, as it were. And as Blanchard points out, that actually the real horror is not being able to rid yourself of the other's humanity, because that's where the question of responsibility imposes itself. Now, and so he said, le plus inhumain, c'est qu'on ne se déshumanise pas. C'est qu'on ne se déshumanise pas, he says somewhere. And this is on his essay on Antenne. And what he points out in the essay on Antenne is that then you have a relation between the effective subject and the absolute victim. And the question then is, what are the responsibilities